My family told everyone I was a failure. I just smiled, stayed quiet, and sat beside my sister's hospital bed. Then the nurse walked in, turned to me, bowed, and said, "Hello, Chief of Surgery." My sister's jaw dropped, and my parents went pale. Imagine your entire family, the people who should celebrate you the most, tearing you down for years, calling you a failure. Then, the day comes when they're forced to confront the truth, in the most shocking way imaginable, and it all happens while your sister is lying in my hospital bed. This is my story. I'm Samantha Mitchell, and at 34, I finally saw justice served. If you've ever felt underestimated, I think you'll understand. My love affair with medicine started early, when I was just 7. My grandpa needed heart surgery, and I remember clutching a children's book about the human body in that waiting room. When the surgeon came out, he seemed like a superhero in a white coat. Right then, I knew, that's what I wanted to be. "I'm going to be a doctor," I announced proudly on the car ride home. My dad, Richard, just chuckled, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "That's a nice dream, Sammy, but it takes a special kind of person. It's very difficult." Then Emily, my sister, piped up, "I want to be a doctor too." And my mom, Diana, reached back to pat Emily's knee. "Now you've got the brains for it, sweetheart." That was it. My first taste of the family dynamic that would define my entire childhood. Emily was the golden child, bright, charismatic, destined for greatness. I was the steady, reliable one who should just set realistic goals. My dad, a business executive, was obsessed with status. My mom, a former beauty queen, cared about appearances. Our household was a stage where achievements were measured by how impressive they sounded at cocktail parties. Emily learned to play to that audience, demanding attention, showcasing her wins, and quick to make excuses for her failures. I was quieter, more determined, and, to their eyes, just lacking ambition. By 10, the pattern was set. Emily's birthday parties were elaborate extravaganzas. Mine? Afterthoughts. When I brought home straight A's in middle school, my father barely acknowledged it. "That's nice, Samantha." But when Emily scraped her grades up from C's to B's, they threw her a celebratory dinner. So, I learned to find validation elsewhere. While they were at Emily's dance recitals, I was dissecting frogs in the garage, doing chemistry experiments, watching medical documentaries. I was building my foundation, brick by painstaking brick, while they assumed I was just passing time. My saving grace came in high school, Mr. Daniels, my biology teacher. He caught me examining slides after class one day. "You've got a good eye," he said, peering over my shoulder, "and better technique than most of my seniors." It was the first time an adult had truly seen my potential. He became my mentor, giving me advanced materials, writing me a glowing recommendation for college. "You're going to make an exceptional doctor," he told me when I got into pre-med. "Call me when you're changing the world." I almost cried. Someone finally believed in me. At home? Crickets. Pre-med? My father frowned at my acceptance letter. "That's a tough road, Samantha. Most pre-med students don't make it, you know." "I know, Dad, but I'm going to be one of the ones who does." My mother quickly added, "Well, at least you'll have a good education to fall back on when you decide on something more suitable." They paid for my schooling, but the subtle undermining never stopped. Every phone call, "Are you still enjoying your classes?" As if medicine were a childish phase. Every holiday, "You look so tired." Maybe you're pushing yourself too hard for something that's just not meant to be. Meanwhile, Emily was thriving on attention. If I mentioned an interesting lecture, she'd interrupt with a story about a party where she met the son of a hospital administrator, and my parents would eagerly pivot to her tale, relieved to escape the boring details of my ambition. By senior year, I had learned to keep my dreams locked away. I stopped sharing my achievements, my hopes, my plans. I built a private world where I could nurture my ambition without the constant weight of their doubt. The night before I left for college, I sat alone in our backyard, looking at the stars, and made myself a promise: someday, I would be undeniable. Someday, I would force them to see me. I just didn't know how many years, how much pain, would pass before that day arrived. Getting into Princeton's pre-med program should have been a huge celebration. Instead, it was more surprise and concern. "Princeton?" My dad raised his eyebrows. "That's going to be expensive." "Are you sure?" "No shame in starting at community college." "I'm certain," I replied, clutching my acceptance letter. "And I got a partial scholarship." "Well, that helps," my mom said, though her tone suggested it didn't help enough. "We just don't want you taking on debt for something that might not work out." They covered what the scholarship didn't, but every tuition payment came with reminders of their sacrifice and dire warnings about the grueling path ahead. My dad even sent me articles about high dropout rates. I threw myself into my studies with an intensity that surprised even me. While other freshmen partied, I was building relationships with professors, securing research positions. Each perfect exam score, each glowing evaluation, was its own reward, another brick in the foundation of my future. Then, my sophomore year, Emily announced she was interested in medicine. My parents were ecstatic. Like father, like daughter, my dad exclaimed, though he'd never been in medicine. You've got the Mitchell determination. They never mentioned I had blazed that trail first. When Emily got into Rutgers with a modest scholarship, they threw her a huge party. My uncle clapped me on the shoulder. Looks like your little sister's following in your footsteps. Maybe you two will open a practice together. My mother overheard and laughed. Oh, Samantha's still figuring things out. Emily's always known exactly what she wanted. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. Visits home became increasingly difficult. Any achievement I mentioned was met with polite nods, then a quick change of subject. When I got into a competitive summer research program, my mom responded by showing me Emily's latest Instagram posts, volunteering at a local clinic. She's already getting hands-on experience, my mother said proudly. She's always been so good with people. The implication was clear, Emily had natural talent. I was just stubbornly pushing myself in a direction that didn't suit me. Thankfully, college gave me something my home never had, genuine support. I found friends who shared my passion, professors who recognized my potential, and, most importantly, Dr. Catherine Reynolds. She was a brilliant neurosurgeon who became my mentor during my junior year. After I impressed her with a research paper, she took me under her wing. You have the mind of a surgeon, she told me over coffee. Methodical, precise, innovative. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. For the first time, I felt truly seen. Dr. Reynolds didn't just encourage me, she prepared me. She invited me to observe procedures, connected me with professionals, and wrote a medical school recommendation that brought tears to my eyes. You're not just going to be a doctor, Samantha, she said. You're going to be exceptional. I graduated summa cum laude with honors. This should have been one of the proudest days of my life. My parents attended, but they seemed uncomfortable at the reception as professors lauded my achievements. You must be incredibly proud, my advisor told them. Samantha is one of the most promising students I've encountered in 20 years. Yes, she's always been persistent, my father replied with a tight smile. Later that evening, at a family dinner, my accomplishments were quickly glossed over in favor of Emily's news. She'd been elected president of her pre-med society. A natural leader, my father toasted, raising his glass. Always has been. I excused myself early, claiming exhaustion. In reality, I needed to escape before I said something I couldn't take back. Lying in my childhood bed, I realized the distance between me and my family wasn't just emotional anymore. It was a fundamental disconnect in how we saw the world, and my place in it. The next day, as I packed my car for medical school in New York, my mother cornered me. It's still not too late to change your mind if it gets too difficult, sweetheart, she whispered. I pulled away and looked her straight in the eyes. It already is too difficult, Mom, but I'm doing it anyway. It was the closest I'd ever come to confronting her, and I saw the surprise on her face. But old habits die hard. By evening, she called to tell me about a family friend's daughter who had dropped out of medical school and was so much happier teaching high school biology. I let her words wash over me. The road ahead would be hard enough without carrying the weight of their doubt. From that day forward, I decided I would stop seeking their approval. I would focus entirely on proving myself right. Medical school at Columbia was exactly as grueling and exactly as fulfilling as everyone said. I thrived under the pressure, the sleepless nights fueled by genuine passion. I was drawn to cardiothoracic surgery, the complexity, the precision. My residency at New York Presbyterian meant 80-hour work weeks that tested every limit. I learned to catch sleep in 15-minute increments, to make life-or-death decisions while fighting exhaustion. But beneath the exhaustion was an exhilaration I couldn't explain. Not that I tried to explain it to my family. Our phone calls dwindled to brief, superficial exchanges. How's the hospital? My mother would ask, as if I were engaged in some exotic, slightly concerning activity. Busy, but good, I'd reply, no longer bothering to share accomplishments. You're working too hard, she'd inevitably say. You need to have a life outside of medicine, Samantha. Have you met anyone special? The implication was always clear, my career was something to be fitted around the real priorities of marriage and family. Meanwhile, Emily had dropped out of medical school. The story my parents circulated was that she'd decided to pursue a more balanced lifestyle. In reality, she'd failed several key courses. My parents never mentioned her struggles. Instead, they framed her decision as wise and self-aware. Not everyone is cut out for that kind of stress, my father told relatives at Thanksgiving. Emily's smart enough to know what's right for her. When my aunt asked about my residency, my mother jumped in. Samantha's still plugging away, she said with a sigh that conveyed both martyrdom and doubt. We worry about her, of course. She's always been so intense. I excused myself to help in the kitchen, but not before hearing my father add, the medical field has such a high burnout rate. We're just hoping she doesn't push herself too far before realizing it might not be the right fit. What hurt most wasn't their lack of faith, I'd grown accustomed to that. It was the active undermining of my reputation within our own family. I discovered through cousins that my parents regularly described me as struggling and overwhelmed. When I received a prestigious residency award, they never mentioned it. When I was selected for a specialized surgical fellowship, they told relatives I was still in school. My Aunt Margaret, the family truth-teller, pulled me aside at Christmas. They're telling everyone you're barely hanging on, she said bluntly. Richard told the Petersons you were considering a less demanding specialty because you couldn't handle the pressure. Is that true? Absolutely not, I said, a familiar knot of anger and hurt tightening in my stomach. I'm excelling. My attending physicians recommended me for advanced training in minimally invasive techniques. Margaret studied my face. I thought so. Your parents have always had a strange blind spot when it comes to you, Samantha. I don't understand it, but I want you to know that not everyone in this family shares their perspective. Her words were a small comfort, but they couldn't erase the knowledge that my own parents were actively sabotaging my reputation. After that holiday, I made a difficult decision. I would stop sharing any career news with my family. The pain of having my accomplishments dismissed was bad enough, knowing they were being twisted into failures was unbearable. I poured my energy into my work instead. During my third year of residency, I contributed to a groundbreaking procedure combining traditional surgery with new imaging. The lead surgeon invited me to co-author a paper for the Journal of Cardiothoracic Surgery. My first major publication. When the article was published, my hospital held a reception. Colleagues and mentors congratulated me, acknowledging the significance for someone at my career stage. Dr. Reynolds sent flowers with a card that read, the first of many. You're on your way. My parents? They weren't invited. When I mentioned the publication during our monthly call, my mother responded with, That's nice, dear. Did I tell you Emily started her own wellness blog? She already has 500 followers. I began to distance myself from family gatherings, making excuses about work. The truth was, I couldn't bear the subtle digs and comparisons anymore. Each interaction left me drained and doubting myself, emotions I couldn't afford in my demanding career. You're never around anymore, my mother complained. Family should come first, Samantha. I wanted to ask when I had ever come first in their family, but I swallowed the words. I'm building my career, Mom. It requires sacrifice. Well, Emily manages to visit every Sunday, and she has her business to run, she replied. Emily's business was a part-time job at a wellness center, supplemented by an allowance from our parents. I bit my tongue again. The irony was, while my family continued to expect my failure, my professional reputation was soaring. Attending physicians requested me for complex cases. Fellows and residents sought my guidance. By the final year of my fellowship, I was being courted by multiple hospitals for prestigious positions. I learned to build my own family out of colleagues and friends who understood my passion and respected my dedication. I found mentors who pushed me further, and peers who celebrated my successes without reservation. It wasn't the validation I had once craved from my parents, but it was genuine, and based on my actual abilities, not their predetermined expectations. Still, in quiet moments, after a successful surgery or a professional recognition, I sometimes found myself wishing my family could see who I had actually become, not who they had decided I was. That wish would soon be granted, in a way I never could have anticipated. By my early 30s, I had established myself as one of the rising stars in cardiothoracic surgery on the East Coast. My specialization in minimally invasive techniques had earned me recognition from industry leaders. I'd even developed procedural modifications being adopted by surgeons across the country. What no one in my family knew was that Massachusetts General Hospital had approached me with an unprecedented opportunity. They wanted me to consider the position of chief of surgery. At 34, I would be one of the youngest chiefs in the hospital's history, and one of the few women to hold the position. The recruitment process was intense and highly confidential. Years of having my accomplishments diminished had taught me to protect my professional life from their influence. When the official offer came, I was sitting alone in my apartment overlooking Central Park. The email was followed by a call from the hospital director. We believe you're the future of surgical medicine, Dr. Mitchell, he said. We want you to lead our team into that future. After accepting, I sat on my balcony with a glass of champagne, watching the sunset. I had achieved something remarkable, something undeniable. Part of me wanted to call my parents, to finally force them to acknowledge my success. But a deeper wisdom held me back. This moment was mine to savor, untainted by their doubt or dismissal. I decided to wait until I was settled in the role before sharing the news. I would tell them in person, when the achievement was already an established fact, not a future promise. But before I could make those plans, my family orchestrated one final episode of dismissal that sealed my decision to maintain privacy. My parents organized a dinner to celebrate Emily's engagement to a wealthy real estate developer. I flew in for the weekend, genuinely happy for my sister. The dinner was at an upscale restaurant, filled with extended family and friends. I arrived slightly late due to a delayed flight, finding the celebration in full swing. My father was mid-speech, champagne flute raised. We always knew Emily would find someone special. She's always had a gift for connecting with people, for knowing what she wants and going after it. I slipped into my seat, nodding greetings, as he concluded, to Emily and James. You make us prouder than words can express. After the toast, my mother finally noticed me. Oh, Samantha, you made it. We were just about to order. No mention of my late arrival, no concern about my delayed flight. I was simply an afterthought. As usual. Throughout dinner, Emily dominated the conversation with wedding plans and stories of how she and James met. My parents beamed, occasionally turning to other guests to add, she's always had such clear vision about her life. When a cousin asked what I'd been up to, my mother answered before I could. Samantha's still at the hospital in New York. Still working those crazy hours. She shook her head slightly. We keep telling her there's more to life than work, don't we, Richard? Some people take longer to find their path. My father agreed, with a pointed glance at Emily's engagement ring. But better late than never. Something inside me shifted. A final thread snapped, maybe. I had been offered one of the most prestigious positions in my field, a role surgeons twice my age would consider the pinnacle of their careers. And here I sat, being patronized as someone who hadn't yet found her path. Actually, I started, the announcement of my new position on the tip of my tongue. But Emily chose that moment to stand and tap her glass. James and I have one more piece of news, she announced. We're expecting. I'm going to be a mom. The table erupted in cheers. My mother burst into tears of joy, my father wrapped his arm around Emily's shoulders, pride radiating from every pore. In the commotion, no one noticed I hadn't finished my sentence. No one cared what news I might have had to share. In that moment, I made my decision. They would learn about my achievement when they couldn't ignore or diminish it. The next morning, as I prepared to return to New York, my mother cornered me in the guest room. You should learn from your sister, Samantha, she said, folding a towel that didn't need folding. Emily understands what really matters in life. It's not too late for you to focus on building a family instead of just a career. I looked at her, this woman who had never truly seen me, and felt a strange sense of peace. I'm very happy with my life, Mom, I said simply. Are you? You work all the time. You barely visit. You don't have a partner or children. That's not much of a life. I picked up my suitcase. It's my life, and it's a good one. She shook her head, the familiar expression of disappointment settling on her features. We just want what's best for you. No, I replied quietly. You want what you think is best for me. There's a difference. I left for the airport shortly after, returning to New York to prepare for my move to Boston. 2 weeks later, I started my new position as Chief of Surgery at Massachusetts General. The hospital held a reception to welcome me, attended by some of the most respected names in medicine. My office had a view of the Charles River, and a door with my name and title displayed in elegant lettering. I sent no pictures home. I made no announcements to my family. This achievement was still mine alone, protected from their diminishment. I would tell them eventually, I thought, when the moment was right. As it turned out, the moment would choose itself, in circumstances I could never have predicted. I was in the middle of a department budget meeting when my assistant knocked urgently on the door. Dr. Mitchell, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's an emergency call for you. It's about your sister. My heart dropped. I excused myself, hearing my mother's panicked voice on the other end. Emily's been taken to the hospital, she sobbed. She collapsed at home. The baby, they're not sure. We're heading to Massachusetts General now. The ambulance is taking her there. The irony wasn't lost on me. Of all the hospitals in Boston, my sister was being brought to mine. I assured my mother I'd meet them there and hurried to the emergency department. By the time I arrived, Emily had been admitted to the high-risk obstetrics floor. I checked the system, severe preeclampsia. Serious, but manageable if caught in time. Relief washed over me. This was serious, but not immediately life-threatening. I made my way to her room, still in my professional attire, but without my white coat or badge. As I approached, I could hear my mother's voice through the partially open door. "I don't understand why they're making us wait so long. The doctor should have been here by now." I took a deep breath and entered the room. Emily looked pale but stable. My father stood by the window, my mother clutching Emily's hand. All three looked up, but their expressions showed only mild acknowledgement. No relief, no gratitude for my quick arrival. Finally, my mother said, "Have you spoken to the doctors? Do you know what's happening?" I had arrived less than 20 minutes after their call. "I just got here, Mom," I replied, moving to Emily's other side. "How are you feeling?" Emily gave a dramatic sigh. "Terrible. My blood pressure is dangerously high. They're worried about the baby." I nodded. "Preeclampsia can be serious, but you're in the right place. Massachusetts General has an excellent maternal-fetal medicine team." My father turned from the window with a frown. "And how would you know that?" "You work in New York." The perfect opening. The words to explain my new position were right there. But something held me back. The familiar dismissive tone. The automatic assumption that I couldn't possibly know what I was talking about. Old patterns reasserting themselves, even in crisis. "I keep up with hospital rankings," I said simply, deciding this wasn't the moment for revelations. Emily's health was the priority. My mother made a small noise of disapproval. "Well, I hope they send someone experienced to look after Emily. She needs the best care possible." "I'm sure they'll send someone very qualified," I replied, biting back the urge to tell her that as chief of surgery, I could personally ensure it. The next hour passed in uncomfortable silence, broken only by Emily's occasional complaints and my mother's fussing. When I offered to get more information, my father waved me off. "The nurse said the doctor would be here soon. We don't need you running around asking questions and getting in the way." I sat in the corner chair, observing the family dynamic as if from a distance. Even here, in a medical crisis, in a hospital where I held the highest surgical position, I was still the outsider. The irony was almost laughable. My mother continued to make pointed comments about how some people were too busy with work to care about family, even as I sat right there, having dropped everything to be with them. My father checked his watch repeatedly, muttering about the inefficiency of hospital staff. Emily alternated between tearful worries about the baby and complaints about the uncomfortable bed and bland hospital food. Not once did anyone ask about my life, my work, or express genuine pleasure that I was there. I was simply expected to be present, but invisible. Supportive, but silent. As the afternoon wore on, my father stepped out to make business calls. My mother took the opportunity to lean closer to Emily's bed. "At least this might help Samantha understand what she's missing," she whispered. "All that focus on career, and look at what really matters in the end. Family." I remained silent, watching Emily nod in agreement. Both of them seemingly forgetting that my career was dedicated to saving lives, including potentially Emily's and her baby's. The tension in the room was palpable when a nurse finally entered. She was carrying a tablet and checking Emily's vitals when she glanced up and noticed me sitting quietly. Her eyes widened in recognition. I gave a small shake of my head, hoping she would understand my silent request for discretion. The nurse turned back to Emily. "The attending physician will be here shortly. We're monitoring your blood pressure closely, and so far the baby's heartbeat remains strong." "It's about time," my mother huffed. "We've been waiting for hours." "It's been approximately 70 minutes since admission," the nurse corrected politely. "Dr. Bennett is one of our top maternal-fetal specialists." My mother sniffed, unimpressed. My silent vigil continued, a strange calm settling over me as I waited for the inevitable moment when worlds would collide, when my professional identity would crash into my family's perception of me. That moment was coming sooner than any of us knew. The door to Emily's hospital room swung open and Nurse Jackson returned, this time accompanied by a young resident I recognized from the obstetrics department. They were checking Emily's chart when Nurse Jackson glanced up and saw me again. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. The nurse straightened her posture. A look of professional respect replaced her earlier casual demeanor. She stepped away from Emily's bed and walked directly toward me, stopping a respectful distance away. Then, to the astonishment of everyone in the room, she gave a slight, deferential bow. "Hello, Chief of Surgery," she said clearly. "I didn't realize you were already here with the patient." Dr. Bennett is on her way to consult. The silence that followed was deafening. I could almost hear the mental gears turning as my family processed what they'd just heard. Emily's mouth fell open, her usual dramatic flair failing her in genuine shock. My father, who had just returned, froze in the doorway, his phone still in his hand. My mother looked from the nurse to me and back again, her expression shifting from confusion to outright disbelief. "There must be some mistake," she finally said with a nervous laugh. "My daughter works at a hospital in New York." "She's not, she can't be." Nurse Jackson looked confused. "Dr. Samantha Mitchell has been our chief of surgery for the past 3 months, she stated matter-of-factly. One of the youngest chiefs in the hospital's history. All eyes turned to me. I stood up slowly, smoothing down my silk blouse. "Thank you, Nurse Jackson," I said calmly. "Yes, I am familiar with the case. Dr. Bennett is exactly who my sister needs to see right now." The nurse nodded professionally, though I could see the questions in her eyes. The resident looked equally confused but maintained his composure. "We'll continue monitoring Mrs. Collins's blood pressure," he said, using Emily's married name. "The latest readings show it's still elevated, but has stabilized somewhat." "Good," I replied. "Please keep me updated on any changes." As the medical staff turned their attention back to Emily, I watched my family's reactions unfold. Emily's shock had morphed into something more complex: surprise, confusion, and what looked almost like betrayal, as if my success were somehow an act of aggression against her. My father had moved from the doorway to stand beside my mother, his expression hardening into something defensive. My mother simply stared at me, as if seeing a stranger. "Chief of surgery?" she finally whispered. "But you never said anything." "Would it have mattered if I had?" I asked quietly. Before she could answer, the door opened again and Dr. Bennett entered. She spotted me immediately. "Dr. Mitchell," she said with genuine warmth. "I didn't expect to see you here today." "Family emergency," I explained. "This is my sister, Emily Collins." Dr. Bennett's eyebrows rose slightly as she made the connection. "I see. Well, she's in good hands here." She turned to Emily with a reassuring smile. "Mrs. Collins, I've reviewed your case. The preeclampsia is concerning, but manageable. We'll need to keep you hospitalized for monitoring until your blood pressure stabilizes." Emily, still processing the revelation about my position, simply nodded. "Dr. Mitchell," Dr. Bennett continued, addressing me professionally, "based on the initial assessment, we're considering beginning magnesium sulfate as a precaution against seizures. Given your sister's current condition, would you concur?" The room seemed to hold its breath as Dr. Bennett deferred to my medical opinion, an unmistakable acknowledgement of my authority and expertise. "Yes," I replied after a moment's consideration. "That seems appropriate given the severity of her symptoms. I'd also suggest continuous fetal monitoring for the next 24 hours at minimum." Dr. Bennett nodded her agreement. "Exactly what I was thinking. I'll order that right away." My father finally found his voice. "Now wait just a minute," he interjected. "Are you saying my daughter is making medical decisions about her sister? Isn't that some kind of conflict of interest?" Dr. Bennett looked surprised. "Mr. Mitchell, your daughter is one of the most respected surgeons in the country. While obstetrics isn't her specialty, her medical opinion is highly valued. However, I am the attending physician and will be making all final treatment decisions." She turned back to me. "Will you be staying for the treatment discussion?" "Yes," I said, meeting my father's gaze steadily. "I'd like to hear the full plan." As Dr. Bennett began explaining Emily's treatment, other hospital staff filtered in and out, each one acknowledging me with the same respect, Dr. Mitchell, or Chief, creating an undeniable picture of my professional standing. My mother, who had been uncharacteristically silent, suddenly reached for my hand. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked, her voice small. I gently withdrew my hand. "When have you ever truly wanted to hear about my success, Mom?" Her face flushed. "That's not fair. We've always supported you." From the bed, Emily made a scoffing sound. All eyes turned to her. "Oh, come on," she said, some of her usual dramatic flair returning. "We all know Samantha was never the favorite. You guys made that pretty clear." My father stepped forward, his businessman instincts kicking in as he attempted damage control. "Now's not the time for family drama, Emily. You need to focus on getting better." He turned to me with a stiff smile. "Samantha, we've always been proud of you. You know that. We just worried about you working too hard." The practiced ease of his revisionist history was almost impressive. In any other circumstance, I might have let it pass, might have accepted this meager olive branch for the sake of peace. But standing in my hospital, surrounded by colleagues who respected me for exactly the qualities my family had always dismissed, I found I no longer needed to compromise. No, I said simply. You weren't proud of me. You were waiting for me to fail. Dr. Bennett, sensing the tension, tactfully excused herself. I'll check back in an hour. The nurse will start the magnesium sulfate immediately. As the door closed behind her, my father's facade cracked. That's ridiculous. We always supported your interests. My interests? I repeated. You mean my career? The one you told everyone was falling apart? The one Mom suggested I should abandon just yesterday to focus on building a family? My mother had the grace to look embarrassed. We didn't know you were so successful. That's exactly the point, I replied. You never asked. You never wanted to know. You decided years ago who I was and what I was capable of, and you never bothered to update that assessment, even when the evidence was right in front of you. Emily, never one to stay out of the spotlight for long, interjected. Well, you could have told us you were some big-shot doctor. It's not like we wouldn't have been happy for you. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and felt a surprising wave of compassion. Emily had been shaped by our parents' expectations just as much as I had, just in the opposite direction. She had been told she was exceptional for so long that she'd never had to prove it. What might she have accomplished if she'd been held to higher standards? I'm not some big-shot doctor, I said quietly. I'm chief of surgery at one of the country's top hospitals. I've published over 30 papers in major medical journals. I've developed surgical techniques that are being taught across the country. And none of you know any of that because none of you ever really wanted to know who I actually am. The silence that followed was profound. My father stared out the window, his jaw working. My mother twisted her wedding ring, tears welling in her eyes. Emily looked down at her hospital blanket, unusually subdued. The moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. The resident returned with a nurse to begin Emily's treatment. As they set up the floor for the magnesium sulfate, I stepped back, watching my family process what had just happened. In that moment, standing in my hospital, watching my colleagues care for my sister, I realized I had finally achieved what I had promised myself under the stars all those years ago. I had become undeniable. Emily remained in the hospital for 5 days. Her condition stabilized, the baby was deemed healthy, and she was eventually discharged with instructions for careful monitoring throughout the remainder of her pregnancy. Throughout her stay, I visited daily, balancing my duties as chief of surgery with my role as her sister. The revelation of my position created a seismic shift in our family dynamic. Emily, surprisingly, was the first to adapt. On the 3rd day of her hospitalization, as I checked in during my lunch break, she looked up from her magazine with unusual seriousness. You must be really good, she said simply. Everyone here practically genuflects when you walk in. I smiled slightly. I work hard. Yeah, she replied, studying me. You always did. She hesitated, then added, I was jealous of you, you know. This caught me off guard. Jealous of me? Mom and Dad treated you like you hung the moon. Emily laughed without humor. They did, and it was nice, I guess. But I always knew I wasn't earning it. You built something real. Something they couldn't give you, or take away. She rubbed her pregnant belly absently. I never had that. It was perhaps the most honest conversation we'd ever had. As Emily's discharge approached, we began tentatively rebuilding our relationship, not as competitors in our parents' attention economy, but as adults with our own strengths and weaknesses. My parents' adjustment was more complicated. My father attempted to rewrite history, claiming he had always believed in me but had simply been pushing me to excel with his doubt. My mother vacillated between pride in my accomplishments and hurt that I had kept them secret. We're your family, she said during a private moment in my office, where she had asked to speak with me. Families shouldn't have secrets. Families shouldn't make their children feel like they're constantly falling short either, I replied gently. Every time I achieved something, you found a way to diminish it. Eventually, I stopped sharing because it hurt too much. We never meant to hurt you, she insisted, tears welling in her eyes. We were just worried. Medicine is such a demanding field, and you are always so intense. That intensity is what makes me good at my job, Mom. It's not a flaw to be corrected. It's a strength to be channeled. She nodded slowly, though I wasn't sure she truly understood. Old perceptions die hard, and my parents had spent decades viewing me through a particular lens. It would take time, and consistent evidence, to reshape their image of me. As weeks passed, I established clear boundaries. I declined their initial flood of invitations to family events, explaining that my schedule as chief of surgery was demanding and inflexible. When I did accept an invitation for Sunday dinner a month after Emily's hospitalization, I left when my father began introducing me to neighbors as our daughter, the doctor, with the same tone he might have used for our daughter, the circus performer. Technically accurate, but tinged with subtle disbelief. I've worked hard to earn my position and the respect that comes with it, I explained as I collected my coat. When you're ready to respect it too, we can try this again. My Aunt Margaret called the next day. Good for you, she said without preamble. Richard's been getting away with that condescending attitude for years. It's about time someone called him on it. Gradually, tentatively, a new family dynamic began to emerge. My parents learned that my success wasn't a phase or a fluke, but a sustainable reality. Emily, to everyone's surprise, including possibly her own, developed a genuine interest in patient advocacy after her experience and began volunteering at a support group for high-risk pregnant women. 6 months after the incident, as my family now referred to it, I invited them to the hospital's annual fundraising gala. I was being honored for pioneering a new minimally invasive cardiac procedure, and I decided it was time for them to see me in my professional element. The evening was transformative. My parents watched as hospital board members, renowned physicians, and grateful patients approached me with genuine respect and admiration. They listened as the hospital director described my contributions to the field. They witnessed, perhaps for the first time, who I had become when they weren't looking. I had no idea, my father said quietly as we stood at the reception afterward. The way people talk about you, you're really changing lives. That's why I do it, Dad, I replied. It was never about proving anything to anyone. It was about being who I was meant to be. He nodded, a complexity of emotions crossing his face. I'm sorry we didn't see it sooner. It wasn't a complete transformation, decades of patterns don't disappear overnight, but it was a start. Over the following year, we began building a relationship based on who we actually were, not who they had decided I should be. I established a mentoring program for young surgeons facing similar challenges, particularly women and minorities who often struggled against others' limited perceptions of their potential. I shared my story openly with these protégés, emphasizing that external validation, even from those closest to us, can never replace self-belief. Your worth isn't determined by others' ability to see it, I told a particularly promising resident who was facing skepticism from her family. Build your excellence brick by brick, day by day. Eventually, it becomes undeniable, even to those most committed to denying it. The greatest freedom I discovered came not from finally receiving my family's approval, but from no longer needing it. My confidence was built on a foundation of genuine achievement and impact, not on others' perceptions. The little girl who had once desperately sought validation had grown into a woman who created her own. Emily delivered a healthy baby boy 3 months after her hospitalization. At the family gathering to welcome him, she pulled me aside. I want him to know his Aunt Samantha, she said, the baby sleeping peacefully in her arms. I want him to know what it means to find your path and stick to it, no matter what anyone says. I looked down at my nephew's tiny face. I'd like that. And maybe someday, she added with a small smile, you can explain to him what a cardiothoracic surgeon actually does, because I still have no idea. I laughed. A genuine laugh, free from the tension that had characterized our relationship for so long. It's a date. My journey from dismissed daughter to respected chief of surgery taught me that true validation can only come from within. External recognition, while satisfying, especially in those moments when my family finally saw me clearly, is ultimately fleeting. What endures is the knowledge that I built something meaningful, something that extends beyond myself to touch countless lives. If you're watching this and feel unrecognized or underestimated by those who should believe in you most, know that your worth isn't diminished by their inability to see it. Build your excellence quietly if necessary, but build it nonetheless. Your success doesn't need their permission or acknowledgement to be real. The greatest revenge against doubt isn't proving others wrong. It's proving yourself right. Have you ever been underestimated by family or friends? How did you respond? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. And if this resonated with you, please consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it today. Remember, sometimes the people who are meant to support us the most are the last to recognize our potential. Don't let that stop you from becoming exactly who you're meant to be. Thank you for listening to my story.